everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So Marathon is a game like many other people expected. I too didn't think it was gonna be much. I played a little bit of the playtest earlier this week, and I gotta say, I liked it, which was very, very shocking. So most people, like I said, have been kind of hating on Marathon, and I'm not gonna say I was also riding the Marathon hate train before the playtest came out, but I was kind of in the same boat of I don't think Marathon's gonna be any good. I am a pretty big Destiny hater. I won't lie, I'm not the biggest Destiny fan, so Bungie has kind of not been there for me lately. Bungie has not been super high on my developer tier list. So when I had those opinions about Bungie, and then I found out that Bungie is making a new extraction shooter, and it's coming out around the same time as Arc Raiders does. I was pretty skeptical about Marathon. I was kind of like, I kind of don't see Bungie really cooking with this. I don't think it'll be anything too special. Especially now that Arc Raiders is out, Arc Raiders is doing insane numbers. I don't think Marathon's going to compete. So I was kind of on the side of I don't think Marathon's going to do any good, but when the playtest came out and I saw it was free, I decided, hey, why not? I'll give it a try. I'll give it a run, so at least I know I'm hating for a good reason, and it's not just outright hating just to be a hater. But then the unexpected happened. I actually had a fun time with Marathon. I know, it's a real shocker. I kind of just wanted to give my initial thoughts of the game, kind of the pros and cons of it, and why I actually do think it's been getting way too much hate than it really deserves, because people have been clowning on it, and I really don't think it's justified, because I think this game is a lot better than people letting you think it is. So I will go ahead and start with the two biggest pros, those being presentation and the gunplay. Now, the presentation, I knew from the trailers that this game was going to look cool. And in terms of presentation, I'm talking about art direction, voice acting, soundtrack, things like that. Even from the trailers, even if I thought that, I don't know, the gameplay for this game wasn't going to be good, I could tell from the trailers they were going to hit it out of the park in this department. Bungie has always been good in this department. As much as I don't like Destiny, Destiny is really good in the presentation department. And Marathon is no exception. This game, I think, looks really cool. Now, I have seen a bunch of people kind of criticizing it, saying, oh, the stuff looks too blocky, and oh, it's too colorful, and it's like, oh, boo-hoo. My game isn't completely drab and colorless and doesn't look like COD. What is this? This game is too cartoony. Yeah, I'll be honest, I kind of hate that sentiment. I mean, art style is subjective for the most part. If you don't like the look of it, that's fine. That's your own personal opinion. I think it looks pretty cool. I think Marathon is trying something different, and because of that, I really appreciate it. I don't think I've really seen a game like Marathon. I don't think I've seen a game kind of do the same sci-fi style and aesthetic that it's going for, and I think it looks really cool. So I really appreciate the art direction that they're going for. And it's not just like in the game with like how things look, but just kind of like going through the menus and everything and like the loading screens and like some of the cinematics. They just look really cool. And that's something I do really appreciate it. The voice acting is also really good. I don't really pay too much attention to it because this is a multiplayer game, but it is good for what it's there. And the soundtrack is also very good. Like I said about Bungie, and its presentation. Destiny also has a really good soundtrack. This is a very different soundtrack from Destiny, but it is very good. I do think it matches the game, it matches the setting, and I think it works very well. So presentation, I think, is amazing. And this game looks and feels great. The other pro I mentioned is the gunplay. This game feels good to play. The guns feel good, the shooting feels good, and the PvP and PvE also feel very good. It's definitely way better than I expected it to be. Destiny's gunplay isn't bad by any means, and I think it's mostly still decently solid, but I'll be honest, I'm not in love with Destiny's gameplay. It's one of the reasons I dropped it, and I do think Marathon's is much stronger than Destiny's, at least in my opinion, in terms of how the gunplay feels, and especially like PvP. I think Marathon feels really good. I do want to, before I go like kind of deeper into the PvP, I do want to talk about the PvE because I was not expecting much from the PvE like at all in this game. It is shockingly better than I thought it would be. Not like, I'm not going to say the PvE is absolutely stellar, and if we are comparing it to something like Arc Raiders, it doesn't hold a candle to it, but the PvE was shockingly much more challenging than I originally thought it would be. If you end up in an area where you don't have a lot of cover or there's just a lot of AI enemies, they will really jump you and put you in a really bad position. Like, they are way bigger of a threat than I really thought they would be. I kind of thought the PvE in this game would be complete pushovers and they wouldn't be really difficult at all to beat. But no, they could be genuinely pretty challenging at times. It can definitely cause some issues in your run. So that is something that I definitely liked a lot more than I thought it would. And the other thing, like I said, is the PvP. PvP in this game, I think is really good. It's a much higher time to kill than, say, like a Arc Raiders or anything like that. Not quite as high as like Tarkov, but it's pretty high. You will die decently quick in this game, but I think it feels good. Getting kills in this game, I think, is very satisfying. The gunfights are very fun, and yeah, the guns just feel good. Whether it's the SMG, the shotgun, sniper, they all have the right amount of kick to them, and so I think the guns feel really good. So those things are the presentation and the gunplay is definitely the biggest strong suits of Marathon. I will talk about some of the negatives, that being, I think the UI and everything is a little messy, especially when you start the game. This game can be very overwhelming. The more you play, the more you kind of figure things out. But at the beginning of the game, it was very much I have no idea what I'm really looking at. And a lot of times I was just kind of picking up just whatever I can find. I had no idea what it was really used for. And so it's not the best. Some of the menus are very confusing. Some of the like inventory and like checking out your armory and everything can be very confusing. It was a minute before I figured out how I expanded my vault. You do it through a skill tree, but that could be a little confusing at times. And another thing is, well, I mentioned the skill tree, there doesn't seem to be a very good sense of progression in this game. You look at something like Arc Raiders, where I feel like you were constantly, for the most part, progressing in the game in one way or another. You know, at the beginning it was unlocking all the workshops, finding the resources to build the workshops, and then upgrading those workshops, and then upgrading Scrappy, and then finding better gear and weapons. And then also, you know, you had the skill tree, you had the quests, you had the projects like the expedition and everything. There was constantly felt like there was something you were building up to. Oh, and the Raider decks too. There was constantly something you were building up to in Arc Raiders. There was always some kind of form of progression. At least in the playtest, there didn't seem to be much of a sense of progression in Marathon. There was the quest that you would do for each faction or company or whatever, and then there was like a skill tree attached to each one. But if that's all you're playing for, I don't think it's too much of an incentive to keep playing. I was mostly just playing because I did think it was fun. I actually enjoyed doing the quests and just getting a couple kills and AI enemies, finding a couple AI enemies here and there, and I was having a good amount of fun with it. But in terms of progression, I can see it being not the best. I feel like it is a little lackluster, but those are kind of like my main pros and cons. But I do kind of want to pivot the conversation for a second. So the big question is whether this game is really worth it. And like I said at the beginning, there is a lot of people who are just kind of hating on Marathon just to hate on it, I feel like. And I think that's partially due to Bungie's reputation. I think it's partially due to the fact that its main competition, Arc Raiders, has already been so successful and so many people really like it that people are kind of just clowning on Marathon. I saw a lot of people saying that it's like the next High Guard, which I think is very excessive. But Marathon has a pretty uphill battle, okay? Because when gamers have a certain sentiment about something or a certain opinion about something, and it becomes like the mainstream opinion about that, that is very hard for companies to escape. I used High Guard as an example. I think that is a very big one. When High Guard opened, it automatically opened to overwhelmingly negative on Steam, right? Majority of those people who put it like that did not play the game. Let's be perfectly honest, they did not. When the people who actually started playing the game, they came back, and then eventually it went up to like mixed on Steam, if I remember right. And mixed was much more of an accurate representation of the game. People were like, yeah, it's still mid, but it's not near as bad as people are saying it is. Like, it definitely does not deserve the overwhelmingly negative. And I kind of feel like Marathon is going in that direction as well, where it's kind of trying to escape the sentiment around it, and that can be pretty challenging for it. It's definitely not as bad as something like Highguard, and from the playtest alone, I feel like Marathon has already kind of gathered its fans. But a lot of people are kind of clowning on it just because of the general reputation around it, it being a Bungie game and everything. So it is fighting an uphill battle. And it's really sad because, like I said, I do think this game is pretty solid. Like I said, it has some cons, but I think for the most part, it can definitely find its niche. And I think that's mostly in the PvP section. So one of my most recent complaints about Arc Raiders is how it does its matchmaking. There's if you play more PvP focus, it'll put you in more PvP lobbies, and if you play more PvE focus, it'll put you in more like friendly or pacifist lobbies. And I really don't like that about Arc Raiders, because I think it kind of ruins the flow of the game and kind of the unpredictability of it. And I think if Arc Raiders sticks to that, Marathon has a real good chance of popping off. Even though I do really like Marathon's gameplay, I think Arc Raiders game PvP might still be better. However, I find myself not really fighting anybody in Arc Raiders at all. The reason is that because I like doing quests, I like finishing up workshops, or I like doing quests and like getting the resources I need to work towards a project or something like that. Or just fighting Arc enemies. I like doing very specific things in Arc Raiders. And when you have lobbies that are kill on sight, getting those objectives done is extremely annoying. Because even though the Arc Raiders PvP is amazing, don't get me wrong, when you're trying to do stuff, it gets very frustrating when people are constantly breathing down your neck trying to kill you. So even though I do love the Arc Raiders PvP, it got to the point where I wasn't trying to kill anybody at all, because I was afraid of being put into PvP focused lobbies. And I didn't want to end up in lobbies where I was constantly getting shot at. So there is a gray line in Arc Raiders between complete pacifism and shoot on sight that is way too thin for its own good. And I think because of that, if you want to be much more one-sided, especially in the PvP department, I do think Marathon definitely has its audience, because the PvP in Marathon is really good. Like I said, I think the gunplay and the fights in this game feel very nice. I do think I like Arc Raiders better, but like I said, because of how Arc Raiders does its matchmaking, I think Marathon could really pop off in this department. And so because of that, I think Marathon kind of deserves to be given a good, proper chance by people. Now, I will go back and say a couple more things about Marathon. And I did mention that Marathon's PvP is really good, and because of that, I think it has the potential to have a good market. But there are some problems in that regard that I do really hope they fix. And that's that there is a lot of times in Marathon you will go around and you unfortunately won't see anybody. I mean, Arc Raiders is the same way, but I feel like it's a little bit more annoying in Marathon because A, Marathon's maps are a lot smaller, at least they feel that way. So you feel like you should be seeing more people than you actually are. And B, while the AI enemies in Marathon are shockingly better than I thought they would be, they're still nowhere near as good as Arc Raiders. So the PvE elements in Marathon isn't enough to really carry it when you don't see anybody in the game. And that kind of also segues into my next part. I will say I do think a very valid criticism for this game is that I don't think the maps in Marathon are that great. I mainly only got to play the first two. The third one does seem pretty cool, so I'm kind of not really judging that one too much, but the first two I'm not the biggest fan of. Like I said, they're really small, which if there was more players that you ran into wouldn't be as big of a problem, but I sometimes would only run into, like, at max, like 2 or 3 at least when playing solo. When I was playing in teams, it was a little bit better, but there was times where the matches would be pretty quiet. And another thing about the maps in general is aesthetically, like I said, when it's like the buildings and you're more in more urban areas, I do think the game looks really good, but I'll admit once you venture out of the more urban areas into like the nature part of the map, it does not look great. Like, it is pretty drab and pretty boring. First map especially. Once you're like in the more nature part of the map where it's just rocks, it's very boring and very boring to look at. The second map with like the more jungle swampy thing was a little bit better, but I do think the maps are kind of mid, I won't lie. And I do kind of worry that from a long-term progression point of view, that could definitely hurt Marathon. And I do think that is probably the biggest complaint about Marathon is that even though I do think short term it is pretty fun, I can definitely see people not willing to spend money on it because I can see it not holding people's attention for as long as, say, something like Arc Raiders. I can see it not working as well in the long term. But I want to remind people is that Marathon, even if it doesn't hold your attention as well as Arc Raiders does, or as long as Arc Raiders does, Arc Raiders eventually did get kind of boring for me, but it took like 100 hours or so for Arc Raiders to get that for me. I don't see Marathon holding my attention for that long, but I do see Marathon could very easily hold me for like, I don't know, like 40 to 50. And I think that would probably be worth the price point because I think the game is fun. Like I said, I think the PvP feels good. I do kind of dislike when people just kind of hate on the game without giving it a fair shot because I thought the game was pretty satisfying to play. And I would, for the most part, recommend it to people. Sadly, the playtest is over, but when it was going, I would have recommended people giving it a shot for free and see how much they like it and not just clowning on it immediately. Now, if you did give it a fair shot and you still don't like it, that's perfectly fair. I played this game with my brother. He didn't seem to be too big of a fan of it, but I end up going in and having a much more pleasant experience than I initially thought. So I guess the point is not necessarily like go play Marathon or anything. I would recommend it for the most part, but I think the biggest thing is like don't hate on Marathon simply because you're like, oh, it's a Bungie game. These guys made Destiny. There's Arc Raiders is so much better. Well, I agree. I do think Arc Raiders is better. I don't think the hard work the developers had put into Marathon, like, because they definitely made it in the hopes of, like, they were obviously trying to make a good product, a product that people wanted to like, that they were hoping would really resonate with other players. And it's not like, yeah, Marathon just happens to be an extraction shooter around that's coming out around the same time as Arc Raiders, but you can't even see this as like them chasing trends because before Arc Raiders, the only real big extraction shooter was Tarkov. So it's not even, and that came 8 years ago, so it's not even like they're chasing trends. And I think for that alone, it's not like a Concord situation that people are kind of making it out to be. So I think Marathon is a little overrated as of right now. Now, in the long term, Bungie might completely screw it up. I don't know. These aren't the same guys who made Destiny, so I'm not 100% convinced that Marathon will long term be a very good game. But I do think it deserves more of a chance than a lot of other people are. So anyway, I think that's about it. I'll see you.